Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you'll please take your seats and turn off your cell phones. I'll be grateful. I'll be grateful if you do either one of them, but if you do both of those things, I'll be astonished at your multitasking capability. Speaking of which, I should actually check my own. It's really embarrassing when you ask people to turn off their cell phones and then yours rings. Although I'm noted for my imperviousness to embarrassment. Not because I don't embarrass myself, but I don't even notice. All right, 2 for 2 here. I want to welcome you to our event this morning on behalf of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I believe I have my speakers emerging any minute now from the green room, although they could be debating defense industrial policy in absentia and perhaps even resolving it. Is the sound level okay for folks out there? Am I too loud, too quiet? I see heads nodding up and down, which means at least that you can read my lips, if not more than that. So, this is that pregnant pause where I'm looking for my introductory speakers. Of course, I could pretend that Greg Kiley is actually Bill Brock, call him up. I'll run through the agenda with you so you'll have a sense of how we're going to operate this morning. There he is. We're going to start with our welcome and introduction. We'll have opening remarks from the Defense Department. Then we'll bring the panel up here. But we will take questions for Brett Lambert after he's finished his remarks and before he leaves the stage, because I don't think he'll be able to stay here until the end. So again, I want to thank you for joining us here this morning. Welcome you to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I'm David Berto. I'm the director of our Defense Industrial Initiatives Group here at CSIS. And I would like to turn to Bill Brock, who is the chairman of the CSIS International Policy Roundtable. And of course, many of you know him as a former U.S. Senator, a former U.S. Trade Representative, and a former U.S. Secretary of Labor. He has devoted a lifetime to public service and brings an interesting light to our perspectives here this morning. So I would like to then turn the microphone over to Senator Brock. Good morning, sir. Welcome.
Good morning. I welcomed that when I was running. I don't need it anymore. Thank you much. First, welcome. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I have been chairing the International Policy Roundtable here at CSIS for maybe a year and a half. And maybe 4 months ago, we began a series to look at U.S. manufacturing, the competitiveness of it in the context of a global economy, and are there things that we're doing or not doing that would advance the competitive viability of our manufacturing sector. The most recent session we had, we looked at manufacturing primarily in the sense of a global economy. The new competitors we're getting, China, India, obvious individual countries around the world. We've gone through the competition with Japan. Now we've got all the BRICS, China, and as I say, the new entrance into that global competitive environment. And we had a really interesting conversation in which we looked at the growth of so many countries, Brazil and others, that are using, in many cases, what we call in the States industrial policy, government picking winners and losers, making investment and even not just in R&D, but in direct investment in particular selected areas in order to advance a national purpose. The conversation was whether or not the United States is going to be required to follow that path in order to be competitive. We also had a pretty strong disagreement among some of our panelists on whether or not only did we need an industrial policy, but whether or not we needed a new trade policy in which we significantly increased the burden on imports and did more to accelerate exports. The administration has suggested we think about changing the tax policy for some of our firms who have put plants or programs overseas where they're employing other than U.S. citizens. We can argue that at any point you're ready. But this is an interesting and an important conversation. And today what we're going to try to do is to focus on the relationship of defense spending and industry and technology development on the entire manufacturing sector. Is it a plus? Is it doing what we would hope to do to expand the opportunity for U.S. firms to grow and to compete? We know that our security needs are going to continue to sustain and grow our defense industrial and technological base. But so what? Where does that lead us in terms of how big will the base be? What impact will it have? Are there things that will allow us to connect this base with the broader manufacturing or industrial base of the country? Can defense play a more constructive role? If so, how? Are there things that could be done that would make a real difference? Could we even try to expand upon some of the new manufacturing ideas, some of the new technologies that are being developed in the industrial base, the defense industrial base, that would have more general applicability? Also, how does the defense industry as a subset of manufacturing generally, how does it fit into the global economy? What are the circumstances that surround this particular industrial base? Do we export technology? What effect does that have on our ability under a security threat to source either products, technologies, or products, or even materials that might limit our competitive or our security interests? Interesting subjects. We have some particularly effective and important and qualified people to talk about it this morning. So may I just back off and suggest we begin the conversation, David? Thank you. But thank you for being here. It's going to be a good morning, I think. Okay.
I want to now, if we could, I don't know how the view graph could go back to the agenda, but it would probably, I have to hit a back button here. That one right there doesn't actually help me much.
Me pointing and
my grandchildren could tell us how to do this.
That's right. The period of time between when your children are old enough to help you and too busy to have time for it was remarkably short. About a day and a half, I think. Yes, that's right. So thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to reflect a little on industrial policy as DoD practices it. I look out over this audience and I see a remarkable number of people with whom I've spent much of the last 30 years on this issue. And judging by your presence here, you haven't yet given up hope that we're going to be able to do something about it. And I take that as a very, very positive and powerful sign. But I've worked industrial policy both for Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. And of course, there's a pretty basic structure that's in place for both of these. The Republicans believe that no industrial policy is the right policy. And of course, that actually is a policy, but we pretend that it's not. The Democrats believe, on the other hand, that the only industrial policy is, given enough time and money, we can do anything we want, therefore we don't actually have to do anything at all. And if you look at those two extremes, they actually converge on the same net result, which is innocence and a lack of responsibility for any of the outcomes, if you will. You even see it in comments made by senior administration officials today, where, for example, they'll say, let the market decide, as if somehow DOD is not the market and has no vested interest in the outcome. But the reality, of course, is for much of the pure defense work, DOD is the market. But increasingly, from a global perspective, DOD is not only not a driver, it's not even a bit player in the process from the point of view of global competitiveness and the global commercial markets and the source of innovation for the 21st century. So into this dynamic comes the new Director of Industrial Policy for the Defense Department. I guess I can still call you new because you haven't been there a decade yet, right? And Brett Lambert, who is our speaker this morning to provide sort of opening remarks and a DOD perspective, has been in that role in DOD now for about a year, which is long enough that you're no longer innocent. You now are actually beginning to be responsible. Brett, prior to his accession to DOD, has a long history in both the defense world and in the financial world, and so he's very keenly aware of that nexus of interplay between the global commercial market and the global financial market and the defense requirements that have to be met by and sustained by that market. So it's in both of those contexts, the industrial policy context and the global competitiveness context, that we welcome this morning our opening speaker, Brett Lambert. Brett?
Well, you said everything I was going to say, so I don't think I need to do much. Thank you for that. I'm just going to make a few comments, and I think we may have time for a few questions. But I want to make a few comments. First of all, thank you to CSIS. As always, they've been gracious hosts. They've allowed us to interact with industry in a way that I think has not in the last decade occurred, and I can't thank you enough personally, and Dr. Hamre for allowing these kind of interactions to occur. So I'm just going to briefly speak about some good news and some bad news, and then three actual points here. I noticed there were some reporters in the room, and I will do my best not to take your questions because my goal here is to not make any news anymore, anywhere. But we are, I think it's clear that manufacturing is key to what we do in the Defense Department. And I was here at the first session. I think I see some familiar faces here when Ron Bloom was here from the White House and Treasury. Ron, we've formed somewhat of an unholy alliance. I greatly respect his vision of where manufacturing is going in the United States, and I'm hoping that the department, I'm doing everything I can within the department to make sure we are committed strongly and give the resources necessary to him and his group in the White House to talk specifically about the manufacturing components that are important to our industrial base. There's no secret that the industrial base has evolved. I won't go through the World War II, or I know we have a representative here from Boeing, so I won't go through the Long Beach story. At one point, 150,000 workers, very impressive. But at some point in time, we have to move on to the next manufacturing effort, and that is key to our warfighters. So there are many different buzzwords for this. I think actually the introduction stole most of my thunder. There's commercialization, there's civil-military integration, and today the word I use is globalization. And globalization has many components at the second and third tier level. It has supply chain implications, which we're not used to dealing with in the department. It's something we have to deal with, and that we're working very hard to get arms around. So the best way I describe the current, when I'm talking to an audience that's not nearly as sophisticated as you all, the best way I describe our defense industrial base currently is, if any of you have been to Minnesota, been to the Mall of the Americas, we have anchor tenants, right? So we have the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Raytheons. They're all in the mall. They're all the key anchor tenants. And then you have a whole bunch of stores that if you walk by them, you think to yourself, does anyone really buy anything from this place? The fact is, yes, we do. We spend $1.5 billion a day buying from all of those stores. So the Department of Defense is really should be viewed as as kind of how we structure our commercial economy. We buy from everyone. And what has changed over the last decade, and what will certainly change over the next decade, is that we consume less and less specialized products. We continually are increasing our reliance, whether it's services or products, on the commercial world, and they're guiding us. And that commercial world is becoming more global as well. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and then I'm happy to take your questions. But of the three things I want to touch on today, and now I'm going to skip many because I'm supposed to have, but of the three things I want to talk about today is the first and foremost, how do we strengthen our base? The defense industrial base clearly is somewhat immune, if you will, from economic realities. That's no longer the case. That has been the case. We've grown at 43% over the last decade. We're not going to grow at 43% over the next decade. We have a commitment on the part of the administration to grow at 1% real growth, and that's why we've taken on the efficiency initiatives, is to bring that number, the number that we're looking for, into greater operational readiness. So basically bringing that $100 billion back into teeth. So how do we do that? Operational efficiencies are clearly the #1 priority of at least my organization and of AT&L, trying to figure out how to do more without more. The other way we do it, #1, is to tear down barriers to entry. And this is particularly of interest, I think, to this session, in that when we look at commercial manufacturing sectors, we are increasingly coexisting with commercial products, and the department must be able to leverage both. Prior to World War II, the department had a long history of buying from commercial vendors. In fact, the first aircraft we purchased, as you all know, came from commercial vendors. But we must do more to encourage firms that are in the commercial space, that are on the leading edge of technology, to supply product to the Defense Department. And so how do we do that? We have to break down the barriers that prevent them from doing that. So we all know from my previous life, the venture capital world talks about the valley of death. What I've experienced in the department is something I call the summit of death. It's innovative companies who have an idea that could benefit the warfighter at a lower price to the taxpayer, and they start to climb this mountain. And the first thing they do is say, how do we sell into the government? This is a good idea. The next thing they do is hire retired people who actually know how to sell into the government. Then the next thing they do is get software that is approved by our accounting structures, whether it's DCA or DCMA. So they continue to add costs at every level of their innovation cycle. Then they get to the summit and they fall off and they become a defense contractor. And at that point, we've lost innovation because we've piled on so much cost, so much burden, that we no longer are exercising our ability to reach into the commercial marketplace and drive what we need in terms of innovation. So that is the summit of death, is what we are working very hard on to prevent going forward. We want innovative companies. We want new ideas. Most of it is we experience in the IT world, But it shouldn't be restricted to the IT world. It should be open to hardware providers as well, whether that's vertical lift or whether it's new concepts on UAVs. We're trying to figure out a way to open that, what I call the funnel. It's not the channel, it's the Pentagon. We need to figure out a way to leverage our commercial environment. That leads me to the second point, which is increased innovation. We've been blessed in this country. We are a nation of innovators, not producers. The simple truth remains that we're never going to be competitive on T-shirts and shoes. Where we're going to be competitive, as Ron Bloom mentioned in the last session here, where we're going to be innovative is actually creating, designing the innovation. And so we need to look at our manufacturing sector through that optic. It's high-wage jobs, high-skilled jobs. That's where we can make a difference, not just for the department, but for the nation overall. And you know, frankly, if you look over the world, the U.S. is unlikely to compete globally on hourly wages. But you know, where we do compete is in innovation, and that's what we should be encouraging. And that's why I'm so respectful of Mr. Bloom and what he's trying to do in the manufacturing side for the overall economy. And that's where I think the department can also lend a hand, because we do, in fact, produce most of the things that the U.S. government buys. So investing in new technologies and manufacturing processes can produce lower costs. They can generate positive externalities, such as jobs, environmental protection, spirally affected technology spin-offs, and they only beget more activity. So the more we concentrate on manufacturing at our strength, which is innovation and design and construction, the more we will be able in the department to leverage those efforts, whether they're green energy, again, or whether they're technological developments. The third and final, which everyone knows, is about workforce. We have all these statistics about our STEM workforce. What I have been somewhat surprised at in the year that I've been in the building is that workforce sometimes in the building is defined as what your degree is. So if you have a PhD in engineering or manufacturing, that's an important STEM part of workforce. It's not how the department works. The average welder takes about 7 or 8 years to become a yeoman, and for our submarine systems and for the things we need that are unique, they're essential. And so in my, you know, what I call, we have requirements for our talent. Some of them take showers before they go to work, but frankly, most of them take showers after they get home from work. And the Defense Department needs to understand that, and that's why I'm so encouraged as to what the administration is doing in terms of the capabilities that they're looking at in the STEM effort. They had Skills for America Future. They added billions of dollars to try to help educate people in junior colleges and so forth on the challenge grants, and that is a very important part of what the department needs to be doing, and we are fully supportive of that effort. You look at our workforce, again, it's what everyone talks about, but 26% of all of our science and engineering degree holders are 50 years and older. 40% of our doctoral workers are 50% or older. And we've declined by about 11% in the last 3 years of people seeking engineering backgrounds. It's a very critical issue for the department, more important for the overall economy, but very critical for the Defense Department. So I'm again happy that we're working closely with the White House and with Mr. Bloom on trying to figure out how we change that dynamic, particularly in the manufacturing area. So all of this said, we can't afford as a department or as a nation to rest on our laurels. We compete because we're better, You know, we compete because we're more innovative, not because we manufacture more. You know, for nearly 200 years, we've been the best and the brightest, but we must now understand that this is not a birthright. We have to work at it. And the department is fully committed to working with the White House to make sure that we work at ensuring that our manufacturing capabilities are the best in the world. So with that, okay, take some questions.
All right, thank you, Brett. So the floor is open for questions from Mr. Lambert, who I think will have to leave at the end of his discussion here. So this is your chance to get in a question. As we always do, raise your hand. Brett, you can call on folks that you want to recognize, and we'll have a microphone brought to you. You stand up, identify yourself and your affiliation, and then you can have at him. So any questions at this point in time, or we're going to let him go?
Oh, that was too fast.
You wanted to avoid is the one who has a question.
Here comes the mic.
Gopal Ratnam, reporter with Bloomberg News. So the question is sort of broader now. We're seeing that at least one company has indicated that they want to exit a defense industry, shipbuilding, Northrop Grumman, because they feel that it's not profitable enough for them. Are you concerned that as the budgets decline and the money that is available for new weapons development is likely to decline, that more such companies, more companies in the industry might decide this is not profitable and decide to exit the business?
No. I mean, companies will make their decisions based on what they perceive the market to be. We don't have control over that. We have some ideas, but we don't have control.
Like David mentioned, you are the market.
Okay, do you want to answer that then?
We'll actually probably come back to that question in our panel as well, so I don't want to take the time now. I think that Senator Brock has a question for you, Brett.
That's even. I call on you again.
I have a lot based upon your comment on the workforce, but let me go back to the question of technology and efficient manufacturing processes. You talk about making sure that you got the door open for domestic innovators, creative people, creative firms. Do we have a system to identify some of the more creative people internationally, firms, technologies, innovation, manufacturing processes that could be adopted, that you could identify and encourage domestically?
Senator, we don't, and we should. And I mean, this is a personal opinion. It's not a department position. I think some of the more innovative ideas that I've seen expressed in the Senate, Congress writ large, are ideas like allowing more entrepreneurs into the workforce and granting them fast-track status, or whatever it is called, if they employ U.S. workers, non-family workers. That's one of the proposals that's on now. I think, again, this personally, it's not a department view, there is a lot of innovation that we have that we're not capitalizing on because we don't have the processes in place that you just described.
But do they have to employ U.S. workers
Yes.
if, in fact, we get the benefit, and why?
I think the proposal I've read was non-family U.S. citizens, so I think that was the proposal that's currently. I don't. This is way outside of my swim lane, so I don't know. But I think that we've seen over and over again the greatest dynamic that this country has is bringing in new ideas, new entrepreneurs, and we need to do what we can to encourage it. And the Department of Defense, I think, will be a beneficiary of that. But I think it's more about the overall economy and how we compete globally. That will be the primary beneficiary of these kind of actions.
I don't want to press because, but this is the subject of some interest in the industry and in Congress. We're limiting the importation of very high-skilled people. We're not letting people come in who have enormous knowledge just because they're not Americans. I mean, isn't that dumb?
Can you call me tonight and ask me on the phone? I don't believe the department has a position on that particular issue, but I think we all have a personal position on that issue.
Mr. Lambert, we'll thank you for your appearance here this morning and for sharing your thoughts with us. And I think you'll find that if you come back and look at it, we've picked up many of your themes in the rest of the day. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to call my panel up to the platform now. We have with us 4 remarkable people this morning, and we'll array them according to their order of presentation. So give me a minute while I put the name tags out. Sometimes this feels like old home week when you gather back folks. As part of this series on sustaining and reinvigorating the competitiveness of the U.S. manufacturing base, we asked ourselves the question, what's the role of defense in that process? At one level, of course, defense spends, as Dr. Ash Carter, the Undersecretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics, has said from this very podium, almost $200 billion a year on stuff. So theoretically, there's a little bit of a driver. Now, $200 billion in a $40 trillion plus global economy is chicken feed. But given what DoD buys, there's an awful lot of impact in a number of areas. And of course, at one level, defense will sustain its own manufacturing base, regardless of what's happening elsewhere. You see this clearly, for instance, in the shipbuilding business, where the level of global competitiveness of the shipyards is not a factor in whether DoD awards contracts or not. That's not an evaluation criteria. And in fact, at one level, competitiveness is measured not by price per pound of steel, but by the capability of the warship that's delivered at the end of the line, in which we're clearly unparalleled anywhere on the planet. And so defense is potentially a big customer and a big driver in this process. But the question arises, what are the roles that defense should play in the larger issue of the U.S. manufacturing base? That raises, of course, the question that we touched on earlier, that Brett Lambert elaborated on, of the role in the global economy and the role of globalization. It also raises the question of the source of innovation. You've increasingly heard over the last 15 years or so that it's not so much important that the U.S. have the manufacturing capability as long as we have the innovation. And of course, that raises the question, and nowhere is this more important than in defense, of how long can you sustain innovation without having connection to a production base? And that's a question that I have my own opinion on, but looking at the research base, it's largely unanalyzed. And there are very few instances of history of long-term success in that kind of an approach. And so that's kind of the third issue. And then the fourth issue is the skills and capabilities of the people that you need to have to sustain that. So what we've done this morning is we've pulled together a panel to offer their own views, not only on those questions, but of the broader issues that we've raised here today. And we're really blessed to have a superb group of people up here with us today. Our plan is that each one of them will make some opening comments, 3 or 5 or 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open up the floor to questions. What I will do, though, is at the beginning, after each of the panel members has had an opportunity to make some comments, is I will give them the first shot at one another. One of the things I've found is that when you're the first speaker, by the time you get to the fourth person, there's 3 things you wish you had said or had the opportunity to say in response to what the provocateurs to your left have said along the way. So I want to give these guys the first shot at each other at the end of this morning, so you can take notes on each other as you go through the process here. I will introduce them all now, and then we'll just proceed one from the next as we go through the process. Get the panel discussion up on your screen there. To my immediate left is Sridhar Kota, who is the Assistant Director of Advanced Manufacturing from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and who is here to represent both the manufacturing world from the White House perspective, as well as to bring a little bit of defense into play. To his left is Chris Raymond, Vice President for Program Development and Strategy at the Boeing Company. Third over is Rod Heipel. Heipel, is that how you pronounce it? I tried to practice that earlier today, and I still wasn't quite sure when I got to it. Of course, I call my son by my brother's name, so I still have a little trouble in this regard. And he's the manufacturer for structural and product development with Alcoa, and of course Alcoa is a substantial defense manufacturer, although you don't often think of them that way. And then finally, bringing up the intellectual foundation on which all of this rests, my good friend Bill Bonvillian, who is now the director of MIT's Washington office, but for many years was both an ally and adversary on the Senate with respect to those defense industrial policies of which I spoke earlier. So with that, I would ask you to join me in welcoming all four of the panel members, and then Sridhar, you have the first one up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. Let me first recognize my colleague, Arun Sharafan, which most of you know him, and he's our defense and manufacturing expert, so I get to say a few things about what I'm working on, what we are working on at OSTP and manufacturing. And my title is actually Innovation and US-based Manufacturing, and their relation between innovation and manufacturing, and actually the gap between the two. So let me start off by saying a few things about what is it that we are doing in the manufacturing area. First of all, the president is strongly committed to science and technology, as we all know, and has also invested heavily in science and technology. And the document to the left-hand side up here, you can see, is the document that was released by the administration in 2009 December, a framework for revitalizing American manufacturing. That document identifies 7 different principles on how to strengthen our manufacturing base, covering a wide range of topics from trade and taxation and worker training, and certainly investments in science and technology. And that's available on our website. And the triangle here, I'm showing you 3 buckets of activity that within OSTP in manufacturing. The first one, is being the how do we create new industries by, capitalizing on emerging technologies, by bringing universities and industry together through public-private partnerships. The other one is how do we strengthen our existing industry? And there are some infrastructural innovation infrastructure that we need to build. An example like with modeling and simulation or smart manufacturing type of activities to make our existing industries more competitive. And the last is on how do we coordinate manufacturing activities across various disciplines, is what OSTP generally does or tries to do. And there are a number of activities in the limited time I have. I just want to point out one thing. On the PCAST, this is the Presidential Council of Advisors for Science and Technology. And I keep hearing from Dr. Holden from time and again that how the PCAST has been asked to do a lot of things, and they've been extremely busy working on a whole bunch of activities during this administration than any other previous administrations. And one of those subcommittees is specifically dedicated to advanced manufacturing. And actually, their report should be coming out in the next few months. So with that, let me just start off with industrial commons. This is, if you look at the picture up there, I would call the cycle of innovation, where I'm showing here the basic research. You start with the invest in basic research and come up with scientific discoveries and engineering inventions. Through our world-class universities and our national labs and DoD labs and other labs. So that's just the first step. Then, of course, you take those great ideas and then move forward and mature them through TRLs and MRLs and through translational research, building proof of concept prototypes, and doing systems engineering in optimization, figuring out how do we design it for ease of manufacture, how do we make it cost competitive, how do we make it reliable, safe, improve the yield, all that good stuff you do in engineering in optimization. And then you figure out the scaling of how do you take this idea and then scale it to manufacturing in volume. By going through that cycle, actually, there are new product ideas and process innovations that actually come about. And so when you complete the cycle, what you've done is you build your knowledge base, you develop the skills and the manufacturing competency, and you build the infrastructure, the tools and equipment. And all of this is called, I like the term that Pisano and Shi used in the Harvard Business Review article called industrial commons, as you can read there. So we build this industrial commons when you go to complete the innovation cycle. Now, if you just do the first step, that's not, it's like going to the first base. No matter how good you are or how many times you get there, you don't score runs. And there's no such thing as home runs here. So you really need to build that, go through the cycle. And if you don't do that, and what happens without the commons, we will not be able to innovate next generation products. And there is some evidence of that. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the trade balance in high technology goods. These are not T-shirts or shoes. These are high technology products where we started going down in terms of the trade deficit. It's going up. And now it's about over $100 billion with China alone. And so this is something that we need to think about whether how the manufacturing and innovation ties together. Here is an example of a product that, again, taken from Pisano and Shi's article. It says why Amazon's Kindle 2 cannot be made or can't be made in the US. Now, the question is the discovery, invention, commercialization, is that enough? Not sure, probably not, because we need to manufacture. Here's an example of how decades ago we started with the outsourcing manufacturing for low-cost manufacturing overseas, and our competitors in other countries have moved up the food chain into design and engineering and R&D to a point where a product like this, it cannot be made anymore because, not the labor cost, it's because the critical components in there, from flux circuit to hard drive to display, even the highly polished injection molded case, we don't have the supply chains to make them here. Now, of course, if you don't make Kindle from the defense point of view, is not an issue, but if this were to be a defense critical, not quite the other extreme of the shipbuilding, I'm talking about there are many items that the defense purchases. If this were to be defense critical, as Adam Smith noted 200 years ago, that if we need to manufacture, we cannot rely on others for products that are critical to defense. So if you go into parts of the innovation part, I say the innovation is the missing middle. You start at the top, you invest our basic research, which most of what federal government invests in, R&D, the big R, is to invest in science. You generate a lot of knowledge, a lot of good knowledge, a lot of great discoveries. And you put that knowledge into something called engineering and manufacturing, then you generate wealth. And wealth, whether it's in the dollars or in other currencies, and we seem to be generating more in the other currencies. So the part is that we still have the best universities and the labs. We have the science and the basic research, discovery and invention is where our investments are. What seems to be missing, as some say, is whether the gap from there, are our investments trickling down to creating wealth and then ensuring national security and energy security is the question. So that, again, I show that the technology, TRLs and MRLs, as you're all familiar with, and much of our investment goes into early part of the federal S&T, over $70 billion. And of course, we do have some programs from the SBIR program, and certainly the Defense 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, 6.5 programs. But you can see the valley of innovation valley there. And of course, unless you mature the technology TRL 9 and also the MRLs 2, the private investors don't want to spend their money, because you got to answer all those questions about how you're going to make it, is it safe or reliable and all that. So that's what happens in the middle. So, of course, we have the loan guarantees that come out of that as well. So the gap you can see in the middle, and this is actually the 2011 budget kind of the real data to show various agencies. You can see the DoD and NIST, NSF, NASA, DOE, and NIH. And again, you can go from basic research to systems development. And you can see the disparity in terms of where we spend the money. Of course, the DoD side, we are heavy at the other end in terms of systems development. And the other non-mission oriented, other, NSF, and they are heavy on the basic research, and again, still seem to be missing in the middle. I do see that NIH, I'm not sure about the applied research definition of NIH, but I don't know how it maps when you map it to TRLs. But you clearly see the trend I'm talking about. So it's not so much even the high technology products I talked about, it's not the cost, it's not the labor cost. In fact, the flat panel screen TV is about, what, 2% or 2.5% is the labor cost. But even if you look at the compensation cost versus GDP, on the y-axis, what you're looking at is a percentage of GDP. And you can see the China way up there, 32% GDP from manufacturing. And you can see the ones I pointed in red. And of course, on the x-axis, we have the hourly compensation cost, 2008 data. And you can see the United States somewhere in the middle. But it is in the middle. It's not at the other extreme. If you look at Germany, for instance, that's not exactly a low-wage country. In fact, their wages are higher, as you can see there. But actually, if you look at the structural costs, such as the energy costs, the pollution abatement costs, and many of those indices, actually, Germany is more expensive than we are. And yet, Germany has pretty robust manufacturing sector even today, and so does Japan. So we need to think about what that means in terms of our investments and how it's turning into manufacturing and economy and national security. So the innovation and manufacturing, I just give a couple of examples here. Health, if you look at about 14 to 16% of GDP, and energy is about 8 to 10% GDP. And correspondingly, you can see the government investment in NIH and DOE in about $30 billion approximately each. And when it comes to manufacturing, which is now about 11%, and you have the investment about less than $1 billion. It's about 700 million, depending on how you count it. Anyway, it's less than $1 billion. But even that investment, I'm wondering if are our current manufacturing investments sufficient, first of all? Should we invest more? And whatever we are investing, is it too generic, or is it sometimes too specific, like crisis management, fixing one problem at a time? Or sometimes the defense-specific things which could potentially be commercially infeasible. They don't have to be that way. Or sometimes it's too late. So something to think about, how we are investing and where we are investing. And should we invest in a planned investment in building our industrial commons? Speaking of which, if you look at other models in other countries, you see the gap from the federal investment and the private investment. We talked about the gap in the middle between TRL 4 and 8. Now, that area, which is innovation, taking an idea and converting it into a product, is what, for example, the German Fraunhofer Institutes and the Taiwan's Industrial Technology Research Institute, that's what they invest in. The Fraunhofer Institute has been around for, 60 years now, focusing on applied research of direct utility to private industry. So the question is, which of our labs? We have great infrastructure, we have great labs in the universities, or the DoD labs, or the DOE labs, or the university research centers. Which ones can fill this gap? Which one should be filling this gap? Or are they filling this gap? And that's something that's an open question. Now, in terms of how we spend the DoD budget, this year looking at the average from 2002 to 2011, and science and technology at one extreme, BA1, to actually acquisition programs at the other extreme. And the two colors you're looking at, of course, these are in billions of, you probably figured it out, it's thousands of dollars, so the top left is 18 billion. So you're looking at the presidential budget average and the appropriation average. They're quite comparable in many cases. In most of the cases, except in some, actually the appropriations is higher. So if you look at these, again, we are spending heavily at the other end in the defense area. And the question is, would a shift in dollars and programs from right to left, would that improve the outcomes? Because you see the stuff in the middle, BA2 and 3, which is we're talking about 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, is where that engineering and manufacturing and maturing the technology and the manufacturing readiness level happens. In terms of that resource allocation, the private industry has figured it out. And before I get to the figure on the right, you can see the program cost growth in the DoD. You can see most programs are still proceeding with less than best practices. And again, most of you are familiar with those. On the right-hand side, I've taken this figure from 1987. This is the old in 1980s. There were about 800 different studies on why Japan does better than we do. And they figured out that, here is one chart that shows the design changes on the right-hand side, on the vertical axis, I'm sorry. And the first job one there, that is actually when the first automobile rolls out of the production line into the hands of the customer. So if you look at the investment by U.S. company back then in the 70s and early 80s, we start off, we don't spend a whole lot of money at the beginning. And then as we are just ready to launch the product, as we are rolling out the assembly line, that's when we hurry up and make lots of changes, and that's when it costs a lot more. We all know that. It costs a lot more to make changes at the end than it is at the conceptual stage. So that's where you're hurry up and spending a lot of money and making changes, not just even you're making changes even after the cars are rolling out of the assembly line. You're still making changes, as opposed to a Japanese company spending more heavily early upfront and fixing all the problems. And you get it. Again, most of you probably seen this 20 years ago. But I just want to remind ourselves about how the industry, of course, the industry has figured out since, but in most cases, in most companies, these kinds of tools are institutionalized, the quality function deployment and other tools. Again, most of you are familiar with. I'm just reminding you about the resource allocation in private industry versus also something to think about for a DoD, which actually purchases more than $200 billion worth of manufactured goods every year. And we should think about it. And not only that, there's another great leverage, the procurement as a catalyst. And we've done it before. This is a great example from the 60s. The point is, it is from the 60s. That is from the semiconductor market, how the Department of Defense played a critical role in bringing up the semiconductor industry by being an early adopter, bringing down the cost of manufacturing, and as the technology and the manufacturing matured, obviously the prices dropped significantly, and now actually the DoD share for semiconductors is only 1 to 2%. That is a great example, and there could be many opportunities like that with the DoD using government procurement as a leverage. So with that, hopefully I did not say too much. Right?
Thank you, Sridhar. Let me turn the mic now over to Chris Raymond. Chris?
Thanks, David. Just a few opening thoughts. I kind of view my job in the opening remarks as maybe to tee up some thoughts, maybe get our minds thinking about a few things, reflect on some things over the last couple years. I know David's going to pepper us with some questions at the end, and I hope you do too. So let me just start. I think from my personal and professional perspective, I start with the premise that our national security is dependent on the economic security and the military advantage at home here in the United States and also in the global neighborhoods and global relationships that we have. I think Dr. Carter last year said he felt the industrial base issues are completely legitimate because having the best defense industrial and technology base in the world is not a birthright. So I think there's an increasing recognition, and I think the director sitting to my right is a great example, I think, of the United States starting to pull many of these related policy issues together. Certainly am encouraged by that. I think it's critical to our country, particularly after what we witnessed our auto industry go through here over the last 5 years. So I think aerospace and defense inside of that larger picture has been a unique and special contributor, I think, to the industrial commons that Director Kota described. I say that because of a few things that I was reflecting on last night. One, I think it's an industry that has demonstrated over the last 30 or 40 years that innovation in the middle. It has blended those pieces, I think, quite well as an overall industry. I think the skills employed and have been drawn into this industry are highly STEM focused. And I would start to, challenge looking across our whole United States economy, what sectors are really going to draw that kind of STEM into a manufacturing environment of this type. I think this has been an important sector. I think what NASA has done for the country to draw science and technology and engineering, math. When we were all kids getting ready to pick our curriculum in college, I bet all of us thought to some degree about where the wages were going to be. I bet all of us thought to some degree about the kind of work we wanted to do and what was going to give us the best likelihood to get a job. I know from personal experience when I was making that decision, I didn't have my life figured out, but I knew engineering should help you have a better chance of getting a job. And if our industry stops attracting, this is this supply and demand relationship, I think, if our industry stops attracting those people from around the world, frankly, and that's going to take some policy considerations in our industry, but certainly here at home, then I think we're a net loser in all of that. So I think the kind of skills and the STEM focus of our industry has been good. Certainly the export and balance of trade implications are huge. With that has come global relationships. In our sector, that's been not only economic ones, but security ones. Case in point right now is what the administration and the department are doing, I think, in the Middle East and also in the Asia-Pacific region. I think they've also advanced technologies, and I think if you looked at any Department of Commerce statistic, you would see they've been better than average jobs on almost any measure. Certainly on wages measure. So I think as we've come about the last few years, I think the U.S. is starting to put the pieces together in a little bit different way. I thought Norm Augustine's work here on this commission on prosperity and decline of the United States and the America's competitiveness in the world attempted to be a very large look at all these interconnected issues, and defense is just one of them inside. But just think about the last couple years. CSBA, Lexington, Heritage, CSIS, reports like this, the fact that we've now coalesced around a manufacturing focus in OSTP, a technology focus, what we had to do to rescue the auto industry, the President's Export Council, and all the assistance we're now getting from OSTP, I think the recognition and awareness are starting to develop there, which I think is very healthy for the country and our place in the global economy. Closer to home, I think back to the importance of the industrial base considerations in the Defense Department. When JSF was awarded, it was awarded on a single source basis at the time, and I can remember Pete Aldridge's memo said that we're okay doing that as a single source to a single company because all these other things are going to be in play over the next 5 to 8 to 10 years. Well, if you go back and look at the words in the memo and the programs that were on the cusp of starting at the time, not a single one has started. And for the first time in at least 31, maybe 35 or 40 years, we don't have an advanced design aircraft in work in the country right now. When we project out to maybe 5 years away, maybe 8 years away, maybe 10 years away, there might be 3 or 4 airplanes in production. Hopefully Boeing will have the P-8, Lockheed will have the Joint Strike Fighter, Sikorsky, may have a helicopter or two, and maybe a tanker, depending on where we buy it from. Those might be the only airplanes in production in the country. That's a startling fact if you look at our history. So I think, the industrial capabilities report that DoD puts out every May, I think it's done a terrific job at sort of describing the increasing problem and putting facts around it in terms of the decline of new program starts. But when you read between the words, there's been a disconnect between the advanced design, the development, and the production in some of our important sectors. We used to manage that relationship well. As things would come down, new things were starting. There used to be more of those things, and I think that has fundamentally changed our industry, and it's one reason you see some of the behaviors being exhibited, because a single competition puts you out of a sector, perhaps for a couple of decades. And I think that's a challenge right now that Brett and the department face. But I do think the regulatory foundation exists and the awareness is increasing. The regulatory foundation. So Title 10, Secretary of Defense shall prescribe regulations requiring consideration of the national technology and industrial base in the development and implementation of acquisition plans for MDAP programs. Title 10 defines what the industrial base is in this country as it relates to security. I think we've had DoD reports in 2009 that went on to talk about what it means. What is a healthy industrial base? Its reliability, its cost effectiveness, and its competitiveness. So I think some of the regulatory foundation is actually there, but can we knit together some of these things and turn it into action? I work for Boeing. So we're a global company. We encourage globalization in the industry. Boeing commercial is probably 80% global. Boeing Defense, not so much. Some of those issues are structural. They limit the kinds of people you can hire. They limit the places you can sell your products for good reasons. But I will say this, when we go compete, and I'm talking the defense side of the company now, when we go compete in any country, it's always about the product you have in the fight. It's always about the price. It's always about the politics. And it's always about the participation. The politics are often codified in almost every country but ours. There are very mature industrial participation policies that you must abide by and propose to. There are very specific rules on foreign ownership of companies. So I think this isn't new. I think it's fun to talk about the tanker competition, and it's become a poster child for so many things, but forget the tanker competition. I actually think it would be interesting to think about these policy issues as a country. I think we would have had to start to get to them regardless of that competition, because I think we're starting to see the connectivity of these policy issues and how they play across some of our departments in government and certainly for us in the sector. So I think as we go forward, you know, I think again the awareness is terrific. I think this idea of a national security industrial vision is important. I think we would like to work with the department to get there. I think it can complement the definitions that are already on the books in DoD and Title 10. I think we may have to consider, I hate to say this, but an external study that attempts to link the supply and demand issues to the STEM pipeline for this industry. I think places like Norm Augustine and the work he's done. I think places like the National Defense Business Institute down at University of Tennessee, where they have the only aerospace MBA in the country. I think these are institutions that can help us knit together sort of the supply and demand of the critical component of people. And the issue of people, I think, can help robust the capability and fill the pipeline we want for the future, but also mitigate the demographic risk, because that 50 age group on a lot of our technical skills is real. And the only thing that's happening is it's getting a year older every year. And so we're struggling as an industry, I think, and we're concerned about what happens in 5 or 10 years hence. And are people sticking around because they need health care, or are they sticking around because they really want to stick around? And so I think there's some structural issues we have to be worried about. But I think this idea of a external study could help, and then we could more actively link demand and supply with some key initiatives. And I think the S&T alignment and focus can be a huge tool in that fight, as Director Kota mentioned. I think we can probably arrest the decline of some of these new start challenges if we really do vector some of our R&D at some prototype starts, even if they're lower volume. We must prime the advanced design pipe that leads to development and production. And we've got a radically disconnected portfolio, I think, right now, certainly in the aircraft sector. And then I think this idea of promoting and improving our international capabilities and exports is key. I think that can mean enhancing the international infrastructure in DoD for more consistency and efficiency. It certainly means the export focus the administration has going right now. And then I think on the periphery, there's just some other policies that we may need to think about as a country to integrate a little differently, beyond just export, but again, CFIUS, raw materials and berry amendments, things like this, sector bilaterals, WTO. How do we integrate this regulatory framework so that it really doesn't penalize, but recognizes and opens up a more level global base, and that we don't penalize people inadvertently that live inside of one place? Those are my opening thoughts, David. I know you've got some good questions to tee up with us.
Thank you, Chris. Rod, the floor and the table are yours.
Okay. Hit that button if you would. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David. And thank you for the opportunity to share some comments and some thoughts that I have. I think the approach that I would like to take is a little bit different in the sense that I would like to give a bit of a personal perspective, if you will, with regards to the role of innovation and the linkage of innovation to manufacturing and advanced manufacturing capability and techniques. Throughout my career at Alcoa, I've had the opportunity to sit on a couple of different sides of innovation. On the one side, on the research and development side, where we've been able to make significant investments of dollars to create a knowledge base. And part of the innovation cycle is necessary for us to create a knowledge base within our companies and within our organization and within our nation. And then we leverage that knowledge base to create solutions, and that's where innovation comes in. Taking existing knowledge base and emerging knowledge bases and creating new and differentiated solutions to meet the emerging needs. What I found in a number of different roles and assignments throughout Alcoa in my career is that technology and technical knowledge exists at all levels of the organization. It's not only at the R&D level, it's not only within our engineers and our technicians and our science majors and our mathematicians, but technology exists throughout the ranks of production. Technology exists within the foremen, within the supervisors, within the line workers. And it's responsibility of every organization, and I would suggest even our nation, to tap that technology base in the innovation process. Every employee is an investment. Every employee has a knowledge base. Grabbing hold of that knowledge base and integrating that knowledge base, whether it be in the basic sciences and what's taking place in the basic science revolution or in the advanced manufacturing technologies, is critical for differentiated innovation globally. We continue. The nation continues and individual companies continue to look at the basic sciences. Much work being done today within biomimicry, understanding how we could leverage what is occurring in nature and bringing it back into our sciences, into our design solutions. There's much work emerging that will be emerging soon in terms of new products from a nanotechnology revolution standpoint. There's also, in addition to these basic sciences, there are advanced manufacturing technologies and an advanced manufacturing revolution taking place. There are advanced manufacturing and advanced processes taking place today that are driving significant amount of time out of our production cycles, rapidly going from, in many cases, molten metal to a finished product instead of days and weeks, in a matter of seconds. These types of processes, which are being developed at the basic science level, in the basic research level, will absolutely have an impact on the types of products that are available to the industry in the very near future. In addition to these types of processes, new and advanced manufacturing technologies with regards to fabrication and assembly types of technologies will drive what is possible for that next generation. The opportunity that stands in front of us is to be able to bring the two together, to bring the basic science together with the advanced manufacturing and the manufacturing knowledge base that exists throughout an organization. And that's the opportunity for global differentiation, I believe. The that linkage, the integration of these capabilities will be critical to the rapid design of new solutions. We are able to create rapid new solutions through the integration of these and leveraging that knowledge base across. As I think about defense, the first question that comes to my mind with respect to design, is defense a long clock speed industry or a short clock speed industry? Certainly, many of our development programs within the defense industry is a long clock speed type of process, a long development cycle that's required. And yet, the nature of the industry is such that we must respond to and adapt quickly to the very rapid changes that take place. And so we have the opportunity in front of us to address those changing environments and threats through short clock speed solutions. And that's where innovation around design comes in. It's not only to look for design options that will address those long-term or those platforms in defense that will be out there for a number of decades servicing our nation, but also how do we rapidly upgrade those platforms to meet the ever-changing requirements. And that's where the design innovation comes in from the very beginning, linking together our advanced manufacturing technologies along with emerging capabilities from research and development. Another opportunity to address speed within the design innovation and evolution is with regards to transferring capabilities, transferring competencies and innovations across markets. We do that significantly and regularly across our markets where Alcoa has been involved for 100 years in the defense industry, and most recently we've been able to meet wartime efforts by transferring technologies from automotive, from aerospace, from commercial vehicle markets right into defense. And importantly, as we evolve those capabilities, being able to drive not only within our company, but also every company working within the defense industry, drive those technologies back out into these other markets where we can begin to leverage and differentiate the American industrial base through these advancements. Those were the comments that I had, David. I thank you very much for the time that you've given me, and look forward to the questions that you have.
Thank you, Ron. And our final panelist, Bill Bonvillian from MIT, and he has a couple of view graphs to race through here. I think this is rapid adaptation and long clock speed duration, right? Merged together.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get through these, David.
Thanks.
Just to say up front, I'm speaking for myself, not for the great institution that I'm affiliated with, necessarily. Let me make a couple of kind of big picture underlying observations. It's hard to get around the reality that the American way of war, since we're talking about defense at heart today, has been technological leadership and success in the Cold War. It coincided with the IT innovation wave. And, the military created a lot of that IT revolution. But it applied it as well. So we got, precision strike and Andy Marshall's whole theory of the revolution in military affairs and network-centric warfare as it evolved. Those are all applications that came out of this, great worldwide innovation wave that DoD spawned. But at the heart of U.S. success in the Cold War, I think it's very hard to get around the fact that the economy grew by 10 trillion in the course of that IT innovation wave, right? From an economy of 3.5 trillion to over 13. That was decisive. And so that leads you to contemplate, what did I do? I'm not switching here. I seem to be frozen on slide 3, alas. Could I get Christina maybe?
We have a panel of manufacturing experts up here who are completely incapable of helping Bill in this particular
Well, it's the MIT guy that's the problem, right? So what happened here, Christina?
just clicked off the file.
All right.
So now it should go.
All right, good. Oh, magic. So I think it's hard to avoid a conclusion from the Cold War that the Cold War in the end was deeply related to an economic conflict and that we were very successful in. And there may be a lesson here, at least for symmetric warfare, that the economic war is decisive and that technological leadership is key, and then that's the war. And now we're faced with a whole set of potential peer competitors, and I think that the economic issues may well be the forum where this is decided. U.S. economic theory, as we all know, starts with, this guy, Alexander Hamilton. And to look at the global geopolitics of manufacturing as the U.S. has addressed it, we've essentially gone through several stages. Hamilton launched in place an understanding that U.S. independence, and I'm citing some work by Barry Lynn here, U.S. independence was completely dependent upon its commercial and manufacturing capability. That was what was going to keep us free from Europe. And launching those sectors and those capabilities was the crucial task of U.S. independence. And Hamilton put in place the institutions that led us in that direction, and that model lasted until the Cold War. And in the Cold War, we pursued a theory of manufacturing interdependence, integrating our industrial complex with our allies in Europe to Japan. And that would promote, that interdependence would promote U.S. independence. And now we've got a new era of integrating technology, capital, and labor at a global scale. And control gets decentralized in that process. And there are fewer and fewer nationals, or for that matter, international kind of controls in the process. Witness the 2008 world financial crisis. That's a visible example of what we've just gone through. So there's three periods. There's that Hamilton period that lasts until the end of the World War II. Rational national self-dependence in manufacturing, right, is at the heart of our geopolitical leadership. From 45 to 91, an interdependent system with our allies in a fairly American-centric manufacturing system. And then that post-93 period, a very laissez-faire in manufacturing and interdependent economic system worldwide, controlled by none, integrated for all. The integrationists feel that extending the West's manufacturing production system will bring these emerging economies into a world system. The realists argue that there are deep geopolitical goals and political systems differences, and that the only question is who gains the edge in this new economic model that we're pursuing. All right, so that's a backdrop, a geopolitical backdrop against which to think about the way in which this country has treated manufacturing historically. Let's look at manufacturing for a minute. Because again, if the economic model is the national security model, in other words, you can't really differentiate the military defense economy from the rest of the economy. One is deeply dependent upon the other. And you shouldn't make this differentiation. We've got to look, at the overall manufacturing sector. And after all, the defense procurement budget is probably only about 4% of total U.S. manufacturing output, right? So they're deeply integrated. We all know that there's 1.6 trillion in GDP on the manufacturing side, at least one way of measuring it. Significantly, manufacturing firms employ about 70% of the industry R&D workforce and 64% of the scientists and engineers in our U.S. system. So in other words, they've got a very deep tie to that innovation leadership that we've been talking about. Trade in complex, high-valued manufacturing goods remains the currency of international trade. High-tech service jobs are growing, but they are increasingly tradable worldwide. I'm pulling some stats from an article by Greg Tassi, came out about a year ago. Manufacturing share of GDP from over 50 years has shrunk by more than half in the United States. Manufacturing output, according to Commerce Department statistics, has been pretty steady from 2000 to 2007 at about 22% of world output, keeping the U.S. leading. But now there's some very real doubts about the viability of that statistic. that we may be significantly overstating our output level because we apply a productivity factor for IT goods. So that number may be, in fact, much more problematic than we're acknowledging in our official data. Production is to employment, I would argue, very much like an hourglass. And this is something we don't understand. That 12 million, that 12 million employment level is the narrow point in that hourglass, right? And we don't measure the other sides of the hourglass, right? We don't really have a good idea of the employment, direct or indirect, that is dependent upon input into that production moment, to that assembly moment, which is what we do measure, or what the output employment for distribution, sales, services, repairs, and so forth. We don't really have a good picture of what this sector is all about. We think it's an hourglass. We think it's much bigger than just that production moment, but we don't understand fully what those dimensions are. We do know, as Sridhar pointed out, that we've always assumed we'd win in high tech and could cede other territories as long as we keep moving ahead to the next sector. But that picture is not looking great in the last 7 or 8 years. National R&D intensity, that's where the U.S. stands as, R&D as a percentage of gross of GDP. We're at about 6.2%. It's not, other countries have figured out this model, right, and are significantly increasing their R&D intensity. The problem here is, if you follow classic economic input-output theory, if you freeze a major input, you will limit your ability to grow, right? And we have effectively frozen a major input for a significant period of time now. We also have an issue here of where U.S. manufacturing firms are focusing. And in a globally competitive world, they're increasingly focusing the composition of their R&D portfolios towards late-stage development, towards shorter-term development. So in a way, that middle area that Sridhar was talking about is getting much more complicated. We're widening our own valley of death in a way here. But, the economists, neoclassical economists tell us, don't worry about it, services are going to make up for this. But I think if you look at this chart, and again, you've got to look at that pre-recession moment here. You can see it. It's, around here. Whoa, around that territory.
I'm gonna invoke some manufacturing technology on
We should tie that down. All right, or not point. That would be the better solution. But in other words, if you look at this, the services line, the red line, is growing, but it's not growing at nearly the clip to cope with the vast deficit that we've got in manufactured goods, including now in advanced manufacturing goods. Sridhar, talked about Gary Pisano and Willie Shee's piece, the Kindle 2 could not be made here anymore. We've lost the ability to make those components. Another point they make is that every brand of notebook computer except Apple and every brand of mobile handheld is now designed in Asia. From a DoD point of view, should DoD care about this? I've been talking about the economy in general, the manufacturing economy in general. Should DoD care? Well, I think there's an argument, and Shee and Pisano make it, that there's a set of advanced capabilities in a whole series of sectors that are currently at risk, and that we've foregone earlier stages, and the later ones are at risk. And those include materials, communication, the new energy technologies, semiconductor aspects of semiconductors, displays. And then there's the issue that we've touched on this morning about DoD production costs. And Ken Gabriel, who's the deputy director of DARPA, has a wonderful chart and statistic, and he argues that based upon the cost per unit inflation rate of the JSF, the entire defense budget by 2054 will be spent purchasing one aircraft, right? So, Moore's law goes like this, he argues, the way in which we're doing production costs in the military for big new platforms looks like this. It's not going to work. So we've got a DoD that's increasingly unable to manage a complex product cycle and production cycle. And it's a deep problem in our defense manufacturing side we're going to have to figure out. So these are all arguments as to why we ought to care about this. Suppose we decided that we wanted to go back to production leadership. So I would argue that we need a strategy, and we're going to have to understand some stuff that we do not simply understand now. And let me talk for my closing minutes on what we need to understand. First, historically, shifts in manufacturing advantage have stemmed from the introduction of three elements, right? Technology advance with accompanying process advances with new business and organizational models. Historical examples of this: the way in which the U.S. took leadership of the Industrial Revolution from the British in the middle of the 19th century because the Defense Department decided it had to have interchangeable machine-made parts and spent 20 years worth of R&D figuring that out. Or Japan's brilliant new model for manufacturing in the 70s and 80s based upon a new quality price trade-off and just-in-time inventory and so forth. Or the work through Semitech and DoD with the semiconductor industry on semiconductor manufacturing, sort of recapturing that cycle. So there was a technology core in each one of those, a technology capability to which was added process, to which was added a working business model. What are some of the technology advances that might equal new manufacturing paradigms, beneficial to DoD, beneficial to everybody else? The new network-centric model, we'll call it, mixing advanced IT and RFID and sensors in every stage, from resource through customer delivery and customer life product, so that we understand every stage, and that stage, each stage can speak to us, right? We're working on this. Advanced materials. We're really working on a materials genome using supercomputing so that we could actually design the exact material properties we wanted for a manufacturing process. The radical work being done on biomaterials and bioassembly. Nanomanufacturing is getting upon us. The ability to fabricate at the nanoscale could be extremely powerful. DARPA is spending a lot of time and effort looking at mass customization, the production of one at the cost of mass production. Distribution efficiency, energy efficiency, all of these are potential manufacturing paradigms. Now, manufacturing is sectoral, right? These paradigms mean nothing unless they mean something in sectors, right? Now, there's sectoral overlap for complex high-value goods. In other words, they bring together many types of goods. But the paradigms have to make sense in the sectors. So you could run a matrix and evaluate the technology breakthroughs plus process plus business model against the different sectors you've got. I think this list seems to work. Another complication is, as all the business folks in this room can tell us, that it's no longer manufacturing or services. We have emerging a combined model, right? With all kinds of new business models emerging as a result of that. And that would have to be understood if we're going to really look at manufacturing. We need to look over our shoulders, right? Competitor nations are figuring out new approaches that we need to understand. And we've got to look at what other countries are up to. There's deep problems, as we talked about, all of the speakers have talked about this, in our pipeline innovation models. We don't really focus on that R&D for the technology, the process, the business model. We don't do much of it. And we've got deep problems at the seams between our innovation actors that we have to begin to understand. Now, could the U.S. assemble a program in this area? Could we begin to even think about this, right? What are the assets on the table that we've got that come to bear here? If we look at manufacturing technology and process R&D, we are doing some work. And we're doing some work in the dissemination of that as well. So if you look at 4 leading agencies, you can add up roughly a $700 million program. That's very ballpark. So there is work ongoing. It's not particularly well connected, but you could begin to think about a model that could emerge here. So if we got our R&D efforts around the technology paradigms we're interested in, and DoD, for example, is already working on this mass customization and a fair amount of work on advanced materials. DOE is working on energy efficiency in manufacturing. NSF is doing a lot of work at the nanoscale. You could think about how you could get those agencies deeply collaborating, not just talking to each other, but deeply collaborating. And then you could think about a cross-agency strategy, kind of like the National Nano Initiative, but it would have to be deeper than that. And then you could think about how you link to the private sector, of course. And then you could think about the dissemination model. We've got a couple of tools. You've got Mantech at DoD is a potentially very important one. DoD's testbed capability through Mantech and otherwise is very important. And you've got the Manufacturing Extension Program at NIST. So there are some tools that we've got on the table if we wanted to do something. I think DoD has got to be a central player here. It's got the stake in this manufacturing base. It's got a huge stake. And it's done the innovation ways, the predominant innovation ways of the 20th century, one after another in the course of the last century. So it's got an idea of the connected system by which these things can happen. And we're going to need that DoD systems model on the front end and on the back end of the innovation system, with DoD playing a role not only in the R&D side, but also in the testbed and initial market side, as it has done historically time and time again. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Bill. So we've cleverly been pumping you full of coffee for the last hour and a half in the hopes that you would all evacuate the room in advance of the question period. What we've had over the last 45 minutes with this panel is a quick tour through first the administration's view from the aggregate perspective of both the opportunities and the ongoing initiatives, the views from two companies that actually interestingly span both the defense and the global manufacturing business with a good deal of success in both over time and prospects for the future. And then wrapped it up with a tour de force from Bill Bonvillian, who took us from elation at the success of our history to depression at the current state of affairs to hope for the prospects of the future, which is an astonishing thing to do with PowerPoint. But he managed to pull it off. So I promised that I would open the first round of questions to our panel. Do any of you have any comments or questions you'd like to offer to each other before we bring it to the floor? I think they're ready. You see, I'm plying them with liquids as well. So, Bill, do you have a question that you'd like to raise to start off with here for this panel here? Do you have anything in mind that you want to bring to bear? Let's bring the microphone down to Senator Brock. Here it comes on the side here.
Just staying with the question I had before, all of this relates to quality of people. And I don't know how much you were talking, Chris, about the work of Norm Augustine in that particular report. There's another report that Norm's group, with the National Science Foundation and the various labs, has published called Rising Above the Gathering Storm, Force 5. That's the latest iteration of that work. If anybody cares about this country, you better read that report and act on it. And I don't see us beginning to do that. We have a terrific skill shortage present and getting worse. And we seem to relate intelligence and innovation to citizenship, which is pretty dumb, as I suggested. So it just seems to me that somewhere there has to be a commitment to addressing that human development problem. And if it's not in DoD, where should it be?
I mean, I agree with you, and since we're at a defense and a commercial airplane company, you can kind of see both the promise of it and the obstacle of it in one portfolio. Because I think on our commercial side, absolutely doing everything you can to attract and recruit the massive engineering talent that's coming from around the world. I think the Moscow Design Center that Boeing Commercial is able to employ as an example. So I agree with you. I think we're trying to use the world's resources on the commercial side, and I think it's more challenging on the defense side for consciously chosen reasons at times with ITAR and things like that, security clearances. But I do believe those are going to be things we have to consider changing going forward, or we just won't have the engineering talent we need to service this industry.
I'd like to add one other thing to that. You know, that young people who are looking at where to invest in their careers tend to want to go to areas, as Chris mentioned in his own past, and I suspect is true for a number of folks up here, where they think there's actually going to be jobs over the course of their lifetime. We have a popular view now that defense and aerospace are sort of on a going out of business curve, right, because other countries are taking those jobs away from us. But any realistic look at the actual spend rate projected over the next 20 or 30 years says there's still going to be plenty of jobs, especially if you couple that with the demographics. Now, 30 years ago, NASA recruited me on the grounds that all of the NASA people were really old and about to retire, and if I went to work there, I would have an easy career. It turns out they're still recruiting on that basis. I don't know if it's the same people, and they haven't retired yet, or what. But in fact, I think it is incumbent on us collectively to reflect the reality of what the prospects are, as well as the doom and gloom of the daily headlines. Other questions? Raise your hand and wait for the microphone. Right. Ah, here we have one in the middle here.
Hi, my name's Marty Meth. Just as a little background, I worked in the OSD office and looked at production readiness. So I looked at systems being transitioned from development and production for a number of years. My question goes this way. I was taken by the fact that everybody focused on innovation as an answer to manufacturing problems, one way or another. I'm not sure that we really understand why we have the manufacturing problems. Sridhar sort of mentioned that worker costs, salaries were not a real issue, yet your chart would show China having a high percentage of manufacturing GDP and having also a low percentage of pay for the workers, obviously, has been doing quite well. They announced today that they're, in the Wall Street Journal, that they're going to build a commercial airplane to compete against both Boeing and EADS on that level. I read an article about a week and a half ago, I don't remember either the Wall Street Journal or Business Week, which talked about their approach to hiring an Israeli citizen, actually, a 70-year-old person, to improve their manufacturing capability. So the focus was not on innovation, but on manufacturing. So I wonder if we really understand what the causes are that are causing the U.S. not to be in the manufacturing area. I'd make one other comment. The U.S. has had a lot of innovative products, haven't transitioned to manufacturing at all. So it isn't, I'm not sure innovation is the right focus. So I'd like to hear comments on that.
Or you want to go first, and then we'll go down the road here.
Sure. Yes, it's not that, you know, of course China is doing well, and for a number of reasons. The point on the chart was that the Germany is doing well too. It's not the labor cost. And we have high trade deficit in high technology products with China, where the labor cost is actually, you know, labor, the fraction is very small. So the tie between, although China is focusing on innovation now, I'm sorry, on manufacturing, as you pointed out, but there is a strong link between the two. You know, look at South Korea, for instance, or even Japan. You know, how they moved up the food chain from manufacturing to design and engineering, and now R&D. In fact, China is requiring that you move your R&D facilities if you want to get their access to their market. So there is a strong link, and to a point where in some cases, the point I made about the Kindle is that once you lose the infrastructure or the R&D capability and the know-how, then you will not be able to manufacture if you lose the innovation. You know, you will not be able to, if you don't manufacture, you will not be able to innovate next generation products. So there is a strong link between them. We are focusing on innovation, you're right, and you're right about the manufacturing problem, but the thing is, the innovation we talk about, we largely mean discovery and invention. And in the stuff in the middle, how you take ideas into manufacturing is what I was talking about. If we do that, again, as some say, that would help us actually, you know, reap benefits from our own discoveries, convert our ideas into manufacturing base. Here is the point I made.
I mean, I think I would agree. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I think you probably need both. I do think that, especially in an engineering company, a lot of times we think of innovation as the product or the technology innovation. I think it can be a lot more. I think there's a lot of services and aftermarket innovation. I think there's a lot of business model innovation. So I think it is the definition that Rod used I really liked, because I think it is bigger than sometimes we think about it in an engineering cultured company. But I think they are mutually reinforcing and not mutually exclusive. I don't think you can have the bulk of your portfolio exist if you're only sort of doing, dreaming up the new design. I think it actually helps your credibility and your ability to have the reinforcing experience of production.
Could I add to that briefly? This is maybe a comment in partial, but not a primary reason. Oftentimes manufacturing is most productive to meet regional needs and to meet the needs of a specific region. Linking manufacturing closer to the consumer and closer to the end product provides an opportunity to improve that supply chain, improve that end product, and as a result, improve potentially innovation for the next generation of products. So we have the opportunity to have that rapid feedback from the consumer, from the user, and move that right back into a manufacturing operation. A partial element of it, not the primary one, perhaps.
Yeah, just to build on what my colleagues have said, I mean, I think it's really important to distinguish between innovation and invention. And, you know, invention and that discovery moment is actually quite different than innovation. And innovation encompasses those, but includes the introduction of those discoveries and inventions, you know, at scale into an economy as big productivity increasing kinds of factors. I think that's a better definition of innovation. And then when you see it that way, it stretches across a series of parts of that pipeline, not just the opening part of the pipeline. And I think, therefore, the goal is innovation capability, but it includes the back end, not just the front end. Now, you know, Suzanne Berger at MIT wrote a really interesting book a few years ago called How We Compete, and she essentially explained what, you know, the business folks in this room understand, which is that we've been working on this distributed manufacturing model at a global scale, which separates design from the manufacturing stage. And U.S. firms have been playing that model out at a pretty rapid clip, and a company like Apple is now deeply organizing its business model around that approach. You know, it's interesting. But I think that the lessons of innovation in the past tell us that, you know, MIT's motto is mind and hand. In other words, there is a very deep link between mind and hand. And those that understand, as, you know, Rod was telling us earlier, those that understand those artisan hands-on moment have a very significant role historically in the innovation process, innovation broadly defined, right? There's a whole psychology theory of the intelligent hand, right? It's not only our eyes and minds that create advance, it's the ability to work it that's absolutely critical. And I think you can go back and look at great innovation waves and the innovation early stages behind them and find this incredible mind-hand link. You know, there's a new book by William Rosen about, you know, how did the Brits come up with the Industrial Revolution? How did they come up with steam, right? The steam power that was the engine for all the earlier stages of that revolution. And they created this remarkable class of, you know, quite well-educated, non-university educated, but quite well-educated artisans who were deep into inventing and tied to a commercial sector by which they could achieve that at the innovation stage. Now, a lesson for us all is that, you know, Britain removed the statue of James Watt from Westminster Cathedral in 1960, right? Talk about a symbolic move, right? Let's make sure we don't do that, okay?
I would like to add one other thing that before we go to the next question. I was really struck by Rod's comment about, from Alcoa's perspective, about the innovation capability that's present even on the factory floor worker. And as I've looked, and I'm a defense guy, so I don't tend to go to manufacturing facilities that have no connection to DoD. So I have no idea whether this is replicated elsewhere. But I've seen a number over the last few years where it's pretty obvious that the company, or at least the entity that's running that plant, believes there is a near unlimited supply of innovative ideas that come from the shop floor. And I have tended over time to think of that as an extremely limited capability, if you will, that essentially there's only so many good ideas out there, and after you've milked them, there aren't any more. And it turns out I'm probably wrong, that in fact these things do tend to foster themselves, creating a climate and a culture in which we can reward that sort of thing. And I don't know how you put that into cost accounting standards, by the way. I'm reminded of the summit of death that we ask innovative companies to climb in DoD from the earlier comment. So it gives me actually more room to hope than I actually came in with earlier today. So I wanted to reflect that. Jerry, you have a question, I believe, as a mic. Oh, you already have the mic. Man, you're well prepared. We've got just-in-time inventory here.
Great. Thanks, David. I want to, Jerry McGinn, Northrop Grumman, I just wanted to ask, your opening comments, you talked about the lack of industrial policy for DoD, and I wanted to get the panel's comments on this question. Other countries do have specific industrial policies targeting what technologies they want to grow, and they want to maintain capabilities on shore. And we don't have that obviously in the U.S. Is it time for that kind of approach for DoD, or is what they're doing, the administration is doing now, increasing dialogue between industry and DoD, focusing on things like innovations, more productive, whereas going down the road of developing a strategy might be create more food fights in terms of what's in, what's out. What are your thoughts on how, in this challenging time, the DoD industry relationship can be more productive in that way?
I would like to add a clarification to my earlier comments, which were, of course, oversimplified for effect with respect to Republican and Democrats' descriptions of industrial policy. But the reality is people often think that the government somehow has the intelligence to tell companies what to do, and if they only did that, they'd be very, very successful. And my thought on that is often, if it were that easy, we'd all be rich. Because we would have figured this out a long time ago. So I look forward to my panel's response to that question there. What is the right policy and approach for the government to have here?
No, it's not it's not that we need an industrial policy, but it's more what I would like to call it innovation policy. It's not whether we pick winners or losers or leave everything to free market, but the right kind of intervention to see how we can, again, I don't want to be a broken record about it, but the gap in the middle, how do you take ideas and develop the manufacturing base here where you don't have to pick a particular technology or anything. The government could potentially have, have an open, public-private partnerships, for example, to promote and to create the right conditions for innovation leading to U.S.-based manufacturing here. And leading to U.S.-based manufacturing, in particular, DoD has many other levers, like procurement levers. So there are opportunities to do that without necessarily embracing industrial policy. That's my opinion. But there are a lot of opportunities to do it, I think. And also the increasing the domestic content of what we are already producing. How can we incentivize companies to, if you look at the high technology products where we have trade deficits again, there are a lot of components like the computers and semiconductors, aerospace, and others, where how do we increase the domestic content of what we are already producing? And that's right there could not only increase job growth, reduce our deficit, but also build the industrial commons we need to do new things.
Yeah, just to build on what Sridhar said, I think that there's some very important, back during the great industrial competition with Japan and Germany in the 70s and 80s, and we finally got out of that not by learning all the lessons we needed to on manufacturing, but we brought on a new innovation wave, we brought on the IT wave, and then for good measure we brought on the biotech wave, right? So that just kind of lifted the entire economy for one of the great bursts of U.S. economic growth we've ever had. So innovation, I think, turns out to be a very important answer. But on the manufacturing side, if we look at what Japan has done with MIDI, right? And, you know, that was our image of a command and control, central government decision-making imposed on industry model, and to some extent that's what it was. MIDI is radically reorganized the way in which it operates. It's a much flatter, non-hierarchical, increasingly industry-led kind of operation to reflect that industrial sectors have gotten radically more complex, and the ability to impose a command and control model on that is tough. Just can't do it. It doesn't work. So they have leveled their governmental input role into a much more level, flat, collaborative kind of model. And I think there are lessons there for us. So I would argue that we don't really want anything that resembles a government-imposed command and control strategy. We don't want to do that, right? That would not be smart. We'd be better served by really working on a collaborative strategy approach. That's the way we do big-time technology advance in this country. You know, we figured out a flat, non-hierarchical model of collaboration that has served us well in advanced sector after advanced sector. And that's what we probably need here. And if DoD could contribute towards bringing the thought teams together from a variety of areas to sort of think about this and develop a strategy and don't lock it into place, it's got to be a living, ongoing, breathing effort. But I think we sure need a strategy here, because at the moment our default is not working very well.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's going to be hard to be that specific. I think there's instances, you know, whether it's a special material or a trusted foundry or things like that, where, you know, they're going to try to preserve somebody. And Brett talks often about, you know, places where they can go in and help with a loan guarantee or the solvency or liquidity of a company if they're unique in the marketplace. I tend to think it's more of a blunt approach, but I think the more concerning issue is if there are no new starts in a sector, and if industry, while they can, will continue to sort of fund prototypes and so forth, but if those prove to be bridges to nowhere, then Wall Street will look at us and say, why do you keep doing that? And now you get back to this question of, I think that somebody started the panel with, Gopal maybe asked the question about, you know, will people exit? Or will the street just expect you to stop spending R&D in a place where there is no new program, and you know, put it down to margin because you're not incenting any new starts? So I do worry. I think we're in a tenuous period where, while industry can, people are making prototypes, maybe larger R&D plays, things like that, because they're trying to extend product portfolios. They're trying to bridge to the next set of starts that we're speculating are out there. But that's not a infinitely sustainable model if no program comes. And I understand leveraging the commercial world, but I think there's some important lessons in there. I got to experience one firsthand. I was at the old Douglas Aircraft when, you know, we got asked to build a C-17. It's a point, I think, that can't necessarily be taken for granted, that the government, where David started, the government's market and business is somewhat unique. We need to leverage commercial where we can, but complete COTS really hasn't worked that well. And so whether it's a C-17 or an A400M or tankers, I mean, I think there's important lessons there. So I think it's more related to the new starts. And as Bill said, you know, the supply chains will fall in place. We'll figure out how to collaborate around these new starts. But if there's none of those, then industry at every tier, you know, really dries up.
Ron, do you have any last comments before we wrap up here?
I'll just make a comment tagging on to this briefly. This topic of an industrial policy within the Department of Defense, I won't pretend to be bright enough to understand the potential advantages or disadvantages at this point, but I really think that the value would be in the dialogue for improved understanding between industry and the Department of Defense. And perhaps that will result in an informal strategic intent that both can use going forward. And one final comment with respect to, and I'll switch off of that topic onto another one that's I'm somewhat passionate about, and that is with regards to education and the education of the workforce. Absolutely, industry and government must come together to encourage the education of the American workforce. There are responsibilities within industry to allow opportunities for education, and quite honestly, there are responsibilities with every individual to be engaged in and personally involved in educating themselves and be lifelong learners. And it's about creating a culture within industry and within our country and within the Department of Defense network that is a culture that absolutely encourages, not only encourages, but expects that we all become lifelong learners and enabling that to happen. And that's an area where we will absolutely differentiate ourselves then longer term. Thanks for the final comment.
Well, our strategy at CSIS is to start on time and end on time. And we intend to comply with that strategy. I want to, on behalf of CSIS, I want to extend our thanks to the Alcoa Foundation for underwriting this series. This is the second of 3. I want to thank Senator Brock for his presence here, because he will also be the continuity that carries us forward to the 3rd of this series in December, and all of you will, I'm sure, will be on the invitation list for that event. And particularly, I want to thank all of you for your participation here this morning, your engagement with us, not only today as we try to outline what these issues are, but as we move forward and try to wrestle with them and really answer the question that was posed here: what should we be doing and how do we do it better? So thank you all very much for being here.